All right. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here. My name is Dr. Jamal Williams. I am the Director of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at the Los Angeles County Office of Education. Thank you. Don't get too loud because the real applause needs to be saved for the people that are responsible for us being here this evening. So first, just thank you for taking the time after a long work day for most of us. I know we have some retirees in here that I saw. Congratulations. But for the rest of you, thank you for coming after a long work day. And before I get started, I want to start with some thank yous. So first, thank you to the Museum of Tolerance and the staff. Are there any MOT staff in the room with us right here? Right here in the corner. Thank you. A beautiful venue, great service, and free. Wonderful, wonderful. And to all you other administrators, we have a great relationship with the Museum of Tolerance. We do a lot of activities here, trainings for our educators. And so if you're looking for a space that's very powerful to engage people, let's give them a call or reach out to us and we'll connect you. Next, I want to thank everybody who's going to be serving on this panel here tonight. I don't know if you got a chance to look at the flyer, look at the details. This is a fire panel tonight. Some really, really impressive people that are going to be up here talking. Also want to give a thanks to the board members from LACOE that we have in the house. I want to thank you all for being here. I see Board President Cross, thank you for being here and supporting. I see Board Member Johnson, thank you for being here, sir. I would be remiss if I didn't also thank our Superintendent, Dr. Eduardo, because she's not here, but she is the reason we're able to do things like this as an organization. Her and the board are really supportive of our work. And before I get too far, I want to also thank JFED LA for feeding us. So let's give them a round of applause as well. Food makes everything better. And as we get started here, if we can have the members of our Jewish American Heritage Group please stand. So this is a group here at LACOE that didn't exist before last year. And they came and they let us know you have a gap, there's something missing. And we want to form a group so that we can address what we feel is a need here in the organization. And here we are today because of their vision. They are very persistent, they are tenacious, and they are the reason that we are all here. So that round of applause that you gave me, it goes to them. Dr. Jacobson, have I missed anybody that I need to thank? Ms. Breslauer. I apologize, Board Member Breslauer. I didn't see you come in. I apologize. So Board Member Breslauer is here, also very supportive of this work. Thank you for being here. And thank you, Dr. Jacobson, for not getting me in trouble. All right. So tonight, we gather as educators. But it's not just as educators, as stewards of our communities. We are the people entrusted with shaping how the next generation sees one another and sees the world. This event, hosted by LACOE's Jewish American Heritage Group, in partnership with the Equity and Social Justice Team, the Museum of Tolerance, and 360 Perspectives, represents something powerful. A collective belief that education is our greatest defense against hate. As we experience excerpts from tonight's documentary, October 8th, and hear from our distinguished panelists that I mentioned a little earlier, we'll get an official introduction in a little bit. We're going to see some people that are leaders in trauma recovery, counterterrorism, psychology, educational equity, And they were invited here to help us do three things: to learn, to empathize, and then to act. Learn how extremist ideologies take root, sometimes quietly, and how they can shape the cultures at our schools. Empathize by seeing the human stories behind the radicalization that happens, and the harm and healing that takes place, in the compassion, and how compassion can be our form of courage. And act by leaving tonight with strategies, at least one, to help our students, colleagues, and communities feel seen, safe, and supported. What we do here matters. So tonight, let's listen deeply. Let's learn bravely, and let's commit together to building schools where understanding replaces fear and inclusion becomes not the exception, but the norm. Yes. Thank you. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for being on this journey with us tonight. So now I'm going to take the opportunity to introduce one of these really important panel members that's going to be up here with us, and she'll be taking the stage next. And that is Heidi Basch-Harod. She's a nonprofit leader, writer, educator, and advocate for girls' and women's rights. Since 2012, Heidi has served as an executive director of Women's Voices Now, an NGO using film to drive social change, advancing girls' and women's rights globally. She is a two-time Emmy-nominated and one-time Daytime Emmy-winning producer. Heidi regularly sits on and moderates panels about the power of film to make social change, and facilitates dialogue on divisive sociocultural issues where more listening is needed. She engages with diverse communities to combat anti-Semitism and other forms of hatred through interactive workshops, primarily with youth. She is a Middle East history scholar, a published author on topics ranging from global women's rights movements, and participates in interfaith dialogue initiatives. So without further ado, Heidi, can you come up to the stage?
Thank you so much, Dr. Williams, for the introduction and the warm welcome to everyone who committed the resources to being with us here this evening. Tonight, I'm so honored to be here representing 360 Perspectives, a nonprofit organization working with schools and communities to combat anti-Semitism and other forms of hate by building empathy and connections through storytelling and education. Thank you to our founder, Sherry Wicker, for working tirelessly with LACOE to bring this remarkable panel to our vast community. A special mention of immense gratitude to Donna Jacobson, Ed Resnick, and Melissa Schoonmaker of LACOE's Jewish American Heritage Group, and to the Equity and Social Justice team. Thank you for partnering with us at 360 Perspectives to bring these speakers to the educators and school administrators of Los Angeles County. I want to share a little story before we get everyone up here. The first time I visited the Museum of Tolerance, I was in the 6th grade for a school field trip. And this was the precondition set by my grandfather prior to his coming to share his story at my school. My grandfather, Grandpa Bill, may his memory be for a blessing, was a Holocaust survivor who endured and survived the Nazi death camps of Buchenwald and Dachau from fall 1944 to spring 1945. For the last decade and a half of his life, he relived his trauma, loss, and insufferable guilt for having survived in order to impart 2 messages to the thousands of children in greater Los Angeles area who heard his story. First, we must be our brother and our sister's keeper. And second, we must never let hate take up space in our hearts and minds. Hate consumes goodness, making space for evil and darkness to spread and suffocate. The second person who shared this understanding of hate is someone I only met in November 2023 in a Zoom discussion of multi-faith women processing the events of October 7. Her name is Nada, and she is a Palestinian American, and I'm a Jewish Israeli American. By the grace of God, we were brought together to have some of the most painful and difficult conversations about our people's intertwined and tragic fate. Through the power of love and a shared rejection of hatred, in our conversations and our ongoing work together, we strive to hold each other accountable and to set an example for those in our spheres of influence, to not follow the many paths that tempt us into hatred in the information landscape in which we currently exist. If you are here tonight, then I can safely assume that you too have a commitment to addressing hate and mitigating the harm it causes to our communities and loved ones. Perhaps I can also assume that you are concerned about the state of our society, from the very top echelons of leadership to the grassroots organizers, come on in, and the polarizing tactics they use to amass support and loyalty across the political spectrum. If you are a Jewish audience member, perhaps you share with me the horrifying alarm at anti-Semitism's extraordinary explosion, that in the best case scenario, not everyone sees, and in the most sinister case, reality is vigorously being denied. On a continuum of ignorance to malice, where do the people around us stand? As a room of educators and school administrators, you are a group of dreamers and magicians. You reveal worlds of possibility to the students who learn in your classrooms and on your campuses, putting everything you can into their future success, no matter where they come from, what baggage they carry, what challenges they face at home. You give endlessly of yourselves and are also unremittingly underpaid and underappreciated. Nevertheless, your noble calling gives you strength to courageously do the work you do in spite of varied and increasing challenges to education. The particular challenge that we are going to speak about tonight is the current state of hate and how it works to erode social cohesion and the shared identity that we need to maintain in order to live peaceful as a richly diverse community. We will hear from 5 speakers who I would like to put into 3 categories. In our first category, there are 2 speakers. Mubin Sheikh, who after a chance encounter with the Taliban in 1995, became a supporter of the jihadi culture throughout his 20s. The story is his to tell, but Mubin then turned undercover and is now a de-radicalization expert and interventionist. Featured in the new International Spy Museum in Washington, D.C., in the Preventing Terror exhibit, Mubin works with Parents for Peace, an organization delivering innovative, effective, and evidence-based interventions to prevent extremism and provide hope, building stronger individuals, families, and communities. And David Collins, recently retired FBI special agent who served for over 20 years in the FBI, but almost 3 decades entirely in law enforcement, leading high-profile counterterrorism investigations. As a seasoned interrogator, team leader, and instructor with the high-value detainee interrogation group, he operated in some of the world's most volatile conflict zones. He is now a senior research fellow at George Washington University's Center for Extremism. Mubin and David will address the presence of extremism in our society and the pipeline to ideologies that are radicalizing our youth and promoting violence as an acceptable remedy to society's alleged ills. They will also address the current state of hate and noticeable patterns and changes that have occurred in recent years, particularly visible after October 7. The second category, represented by our panelist, Dr. Miri Bar-Halpern, clinical psychologist, trauma and resilience expert, and director of trauma training and servants at Parents for Peace, will walk us through her analysis of anti-Semitism as the connective tissue that binds together various extremist ideologies on both the far left and the far right. From her expertise in trauma-informed care, she will offer practical tools and methods to foster our awareness of social dynamics that arise when communities, students and teachers being part of those communities, are experiencing trauma and how we must properly attend to these individuals in order to heal and create inclusive spaces for all of us. The third and final category are school administrators. Dr. Denise Jaramillo, Superintendent of Alhambra Unified School District, and Dr. Kathrine Morillo-Shone, Director of Equity and Professional Learning of Pomona Unified School District. Dr. Jaramillo has a distinguished professional history with her district, having worked in various administrative and instructional positions throughout her tenure. Her career with AUSD began in 1987 when she was hired as a classroom teacher. She's held a variety of roles that include overseeing curriculum and instruction, special projects, principal, and financial services. Dr. Kathrine Morillo-Shone has served in various leadership roles since 1998. She is a proud first-generation doctoral graduate of Cal Poly Pomona with a master's degree in cross-cultural teaching. She extends her commitment to equity by cultivating the next generation of transformational leaders as an adjunct professor at Cal Poly Pomona and the University of Laverne. Dr. Jaramillo and Dr. Shone will share current programs in their districts and observations they have made in the efforts to protect students, to resist further division, and to foster safe and welcoming campuses for all of their learners and faculty members. I know that we will all learn so much from these 5 speakers. And I hope in their conversation with each other, because I've invited them to interrupt me and talk to each other once they get up here, we will be able to bridge a gap that may exist between what our educational providers know about the sources and forces of hate that our students have access to today, and evaluate whether or not how we are addressing hate is sufficient to the challenges that we are currently facing. As a reminder, interspersed within our dialogue will be clips from the film October 8, a film unpacking the emergence of anti-Semitism on college campuses, social media, and on the streets since October 7, 2023. Finally, the QR code in the top right corner behind me there, or to the left of me, will take you to a Google form where you can submit questions and comments about what you hear this evening as they come up. Time permitting, at the end of the conversation, we'll take up to 3 questions and present them to the panelists. So at this time, I would like to invite our panelists to come up to the stage and sit under your photo.
It's not lost on me that throughout history there have been Jews who gave their lives for the cause of civil rights. Andrew Goodman, Michael Schwerner were brutally murdered in the Mississippi burning so that Black Americans could vote and live freely, unencumbered by the cruelty of Jim Crow. And so for me, the lesson learned from history is that we're all in this together. We all have a moral obligation to fight extremism, hate, and fear, no matter what form it takes. And that obligation is based not only on the particularity of our identity, it's based on something more universal, which is our common humanity. And for me, October 7th was so barbaric that it was a frontal assault on our common humanity. College campuses and social media platforms are indoctrinating young Americans with a hatred for Israel that is so visceral and so fanatical that it renders them indifferent to the butchering of Israeli babies, to the cold-blooded murder of Israeli children and civilians. And so if we, as a society, cannot bring ourselves to condemn the cold-blooded murder of children and civilians with moral clarity, then we should ask ourselves, what are we becoming as a society? This is not only about Israel, and this is not only about the Jewish community. What is at stake is the soul of America.
So, welcome everyone. So glad to have you here. And I find that in our modern age, oftentimes we're using terms that we all think we know what they mean or that we all have the same understanding of the definition. So I want to make sure that we're all working with the same definition tonight about extremism. So Mubin, I'd like to start with you and ask you to share a little bit about your story of living in an extremist worldview and being radicalized, and then to becoming a specialist in de-radicalization. And tell us, what is extremism? What is it?
Oh, easy question, I guess. Shalom Aleichem, Salam Alaikum, peace be upon you. My name is Mubin. I'm with Parents for Peace, with my friend and partner in crime, Miri. Very quickly, I was a teenager. I come from an Indian Muslim background. I was a teenager. I had a house party. I got caught by my uncle, my father's oldest brother. Shame and guilt. I reached back into my cultural context. I found a missionary type group that I went with to India and Pakistan. Met the Taliban while I was there, became enamored by them. Why? Because I was looking for some kind of validation. I needed to see a group that resonated with my sacred values. The way that Muslims grow up, especially with the stories about the Prophet ﷺ and the companions. And now what you have is these people who dress in the costume of Islam. beards, robes, turbans. They must be Muslim. They must be the best Muslims because they look the part. And that's exactly what I thought. I saw them, I was like, wow, these guys are like the Sahaba, the disciples of the Prophet, alayhi salam. So became enamored by them, came back to Canada and escalated. I joined a more extreme group of individuals. You can call them Salafi Takfiri. A Takfiri is one who makes takfir, which is to declare people outside of Islam. And the extreme extension of that is when you declare them out of Islam, according to the extremist view, you can kill them now. Right? It allows you to justify all sorts of atrocities against these people because they're the ultimate other. I was flipping through my phone, I was actually paying attention. But this is something that bothered me about October 7th. I kind of felt, so just on my story, I got radicalized, I came back, I kind of escalated. I got married in '98, that calmed me down a lot, but not completely. Sometimes marriage radicalizes people. It's just like, husbands with wives. They're like, they radicalize you, they radicalize us. It's lovely. Then 9/11 happened, and I thought to myself, this is not right. Like, I understand fighting and that whole thing, but flying planes into buildings, I didn't quite understand. I felt like after October 7, I felt like what I felt like after 9/11. I was like, am I mental? Am I crazy? Because I grew up learning this stuff is against Islam. This is against Islam. And I see these people do it, and then it's like, well, wait a second, what's going on? So, there's a prophetic report, right, where armies were dispatched to Syria, and we're told, I give you 10 instructions. Do not kill a woman, nor a child, nor an infirm elder. Do not cut down fruit-bearing trees, nor tear down inhabited buildings. And it goes on, don't kill sheep or animals except for food. Don't burn or drown bees' nests. If you're not allowed to do these things, how is any of that stuff allowed in Islam? The Sheikh of Gaza Islamic University, former dean of Sharia, gave a fatwa from Gaza Islamic University, gave a fatwa against Hamas. What they did, they violated the rules of jihad. The Saudi Salafi scholars, when the Hamas brought out the Bibas children and made a theater display of their coffins, I think they put arrest date is what they put on the coffins, like arresting babies now. Like, even they said that this is not Islam. We don't. So for me, I got enamored by it. After 9/11, I went to Syria. I studied Arabic and Islamic studies. I realized through that, when you were saying in the beginning about education being the key, I learned through the study of Islam that this stuff is completely against Islam. I literally carry the references with me on my phone to make the point. So extremism, so let's start with radicalization and I'll close off with that. Radicalization, you hear this term a lot, right? Okay, I'm gonna nerd out just for a little bit. So the origins, if you really wanna, because I went down the rabbit hole. If you really wanna, it actually starts when the British were moving from a monarchy system to a parliamentary system. Because it was a fundamental shift in the way in which the country did business, it was called a radical change. It was radically different. That term radical, that's where it comes from. Radicalized is basically a human, normal psychological process whereby people become increasingly extreme in their views. Okay, process, normal, human psychological. So we often hear this, Martin Luther King Jr., right? Was he radicalized? I don't know. Was he a radical? We would say, yeah, according to the way that the state viewed him, he was radical. But that in and of itself is not a bad thing. It's just when we see its outputs. So I would say radicalization has two outputs. The first output is extremism. Extremism, that's simply defined as the belief that violence in the public space is okay. And then the other output is violent extremism, where doing the violence in the public space is okay. The vast majority of radicalized people do not become violent. The vast majority of radicalized people do not become violent. those who do become violent, there are different reasons. We can kind of get into that. They feel like the mechanisms of redress are not legitimate, are not valid, are not going to give them what they want. But at the end of the day, these are the two outputs of radicalization. And I'll just close with this, that we'll talk more about this, I'm sure, but those of you, obviously, who are educators, and actually once upon a time I was a professor at college, and I have my own experience with like teaching a certain topic, terrorism, which was sensitive to some people, depending on their background, and I got pushback from some people because I said, you know, I brought up, we were actually studying the Sicarii who were ancient Jewish zealots, you know, who would stab up the Roman soldiers and take off. And I said, yeah, these are terrorists, right? That's what we would call them. And then somebody had an issue, and then, but I explained it to him. We'll talk more about like tactics that we can use to whatever, but that's the definition of extremism.
Thank you,
as I
Mubin.
understand it.
And thank you for sharing your story. I think it's fascinating and brave. I want to go over to David and ask you, from your career and your life experience of observing and intervening on extremism, how would you define extremism? From your perspective, what's the relationship between extremism and radicalization? Because if we're using these words interchangeably, should we be or not? How are we going to differentiate in our conversation?
Sure. So being with the FBI, you know, we dealt with those that typically we would get information that someone was they were looking at, you know, they were trying to acquire chemicals, for example. Chemicals that will be multi-use, but it's also multi-use, meaning it could be used for good things, but also used for, you know, for an explosive, for example. We would have information that individuals would be online expressing how they feel about Jews or how they feel about different groups of people, and sort of aspirationally wanting to do an attack. And so we would open those cases, and then you investigate those cases, and that's really where a lot of my gray hair came from, because you're trying to figure out, okay, you know, is this person just interested, in being, this extremist ideology where, you know, they're following different radical preachers. Anwar al-Awlaki was probably the most predominant one before he was killed in 2011. A lot of the stuff is online. These individuals would get introduced to this material, and then we could see, from looking at their emails and looking at things that they were posting about, you could just sort of see this, you know, it's a process. Some of them would stop short. It kind of goes to what Mubin was talking about. And then unfortunately some of them would then take action. And so that's where, you know, trying to decipher, okay, they're digesting extremist sermons and messages, or they're communicating. ISIS was very prolific. Their fighters would be in Syria, and they would have Twitter handles. And so we would have someone in Los Angeles following a Twitter handle of an external plotter with ISIS. So we know it's a very bad person that someone in LA is following. They would start communicating. And then again, you would see that, and then we have to make the decision of, are we going to go overt to disrupt this? Are they working with any co-conspirators? Is there any foreign direction and control? There would be with the ISIS, for example. And then we would decide, and then, you know, oftentimes you would see the communication would change, where it would be on this Twitter, for example, and then they would take it to a platform that we didn't have the decryption tools. Well, then now my hair will turn gray, because now I can't see what they're saying. In the last 10 years, juveniles have become sort of the biggest problem, which is, there's many problems with this. For the federal government, for example, when juveniles are juveniles, 15-year-olds are 15-year-olds. We were all 15 at one time. And when, you know, the Bureau, for example, gets information where 15-year-olds are consuming extremist material from overseas or here in the U.S., the federal government doesn't have interest in prosecuting juveniles, so it puts the Bureau in a hard spot. And so, folks like Mubin, we would try to get them involved to where we could try to off-ramp them from that process before they decide to take up something and do an overt act.
Thank you, David. So you're talking about a lot of your work was observing behaviors, essentially. And so I'm going to go to Miri now. Miri, from your clinical practice, tell us more about what leads individuals, especially young people, into extremism, and how are those behaviors presenting themselves vis-a-vis the experiences of your patients who come to you for trauma treatment?
Okay, it's quite a question. Well, first of all, when you think about teenagers, they're already vulnerable just because they're teenagers, right? Their brain is not fully developed. They're not thinking in a more flexible way. They tend to think in a black and white type of way. And also social relationship is the world for them. Not the parents, not the family, but the social relationship. Now, when you have a student, a teenager, that is already vulnerable because of the brain development, but also they don't have a sense of meaning or purpose or belonging, now they become more vulnerable to extremism. The problem is that COVID did a number on all of us, but especially on teenagers, and they've been down that rabbit hole of being online for a long time. This is exactly where people are going to take advantage of them. This is where radicalization usually happens. Discord, Roblox, TikTok is one of them as well, Telegrams. And I think that a lot of teenagers, they don't really understand the difference between what is propaganda and what is not propaganda. So that is also part of the problem. Mubin was talking about some of the things that he's been through, and one of the things that I would highlight that makes people more vulnerable to extremism is trauma and unresolved grievances. So when I have some displaced anger, I would call it secondary emotion, because a lot of time with trauma, we ignore the primary emotion of sadness, and we go to the secondary emotion of anger, which is what people would see out there. When I don't know where to place this anger, and then comes a group and say, we will help you, and you're going to fight a bigger cause now. I'm going to give you a purpose, I'm going to give you meaning, and I'm going to give you the environment, I'm going to support you. It's the perfect storm for extremism, basically.
Thank you. David, back to you. Could you tell us what are the current trends? What are the most extremist ideologies most active in the U.S. today?
Probably the most active is since 10/7. We all saw how, our youngest and brightest kids on college campuses are sort of wrapping themselves in this hate. That's been, we all saw that after 10/8. A lot of people think that was an organic response, but the reality is it isn't an organic response. The Muslim Brotherhood created Hamas back in 1987, and the Muslim Brotherhood, the International Muslim Brotherhood, ordered their chapters around the world to support this new entity that they had created. And so the Palestinian chapter of the Muslim Brotherhood here in the U.S. Did just that. They created different organizations to support Hamas back overseas in the work that they were doing in Gaza and the West Bank. They had a conspiratorial meeting in 1993 in Philadelphia. It was right after the signing of the Oslo Peace Accords in September of 1993 between Israel and Yasser Arafat and President Clinton. And at that meeting, they decided that they were going to specifically target universities, the media and politics and research centers. And so with that, they were going to put, members that were sympathetic to their cause at these different institutions that we have in our country. And so that was 32 years ago. The first 3 days in October of 1993, they met in Philadelphia. And so when 10/7 happened, I was still with the Bureau. And again, just for context, I started in 2004 in DC. And so when there would be things going on overseas, like during the Intifada in Israel in 04, 05, before Hamas obtained control of Gaza in 2006, there would be protests in certain spots of downtown DC, but there might be 7, 8, 9 people. Fast forward to 10/7, and then the response to it on October 8th, when I saw it, to me, it's, oh, this was planned, and this goes all the way back to 1993. So they've had 32 years to put this in place, and when 10/7 happened, you have different organizations that are targeting our young people in colleges to get them behind, Israel. Like 10/7 didn't happen. Like the whole thing started on 10/8, and they're behind, most of that that you saw on campuses. Their approach, their timeline, how they do things is much different than like an Al-Qaeda group. They want Sharia law, today or tomorrow. But the Muslim Brotherhood, they take a long game approach to it, a 100-year, 200-year plan. Some of their leaders just last summer were saying that their plan is to get 50 members in our U.S. Congress. All of that is not a good thing, for sure.
So if this was a hurricane warning, like what category are we looking at right now in the U.S.?
God, these questions are hard. A hurricane warning. We saw it in 2005. We went to London in 2000. So the Bureau only had a handful of terrorism squads working Hamas Muslim Brotherhood in 2004, 2005, mainly because Al-Qaeda did the attack on 2001, and so most of the FBI's resources were going after Al-Qaeda cases in the U.S. to ensure that we don't have another Al-Qaeda attack in the U.S. So we went to London, and my team went there in 06, 07. And if you go in the southeast part of London, I don't recall the town, but we came out of the tube of the subway, and I felt like I was in Islamabad. Didn't know that you were in London. It looked, if you've never been to Islamabad, you can probably imagine what that looks like. That's what was going on in London. And so we thought, okay, so London's just a little ahead of us as far as them making inroads and, sort of infiltrating the government and having things shifted in their way. For us to see the response on 10/8 and see again these encampments and these young kids, wearing the Hezbollah or Hamas flags, if it's not a wake-up call to, again, everybody else, I don't know what else you need to see.
Thank you. Mubin, what are you seeing amongst youth in 2025 that reminds you of yourself in the 1990s?
Yeah. What am I seeing today? So we were having a little brief conversation about that. Back in the day, you had to leave your house. You had to get on a bus. You had to go and see your friends. There was a lot of that in-person communication. It took a long time. I had to get on a bus. I had to ride the bus. So did my buddy, and so did the other buddy. And so it was very, it took time. The difference today is that social networks accelerate that time, eliminate that time. You don't gotta get on a bus. You don't even gotta put on your pajamas. You can just be in your underwear. And a lot of people do that, right? Some of you have not in your underwear, but at least you're just wearing a shirt. You got your pajama pants on underneath. We've all done it. It's cool. But today, though, the kids, because I have 5 kids. My oldest is 26. My youngest is 17. So I've had like 3 teenagers at the same time. So that's where my counterterrorism experience actually comes from. Yeah. And I've oh my God, I'll just admit it. I've tested on them. I've experimented on them. Deploying narratives, seeing what works, what resonates with them, what doesn't work. I remember the time I told them, I was like, yeah, but your brain is only this big. Like, how could you possibly know what I know? But as we all know, teenagers, they know everything, right? And I keep telling them, I was like, have you ever heard of like teenagers giving birth to parents? Like, that doesn't happen. So So today, the kids are online. It's instantaneous. The availability of information is just crazy. We live in a hyper-information age. The problem, I think, is that kids are not taught how to think. Kids are not taught how to filter information. The algorithms and the mechanics of social media use is rewiring their brains. Look what it's doing to adults. You've seen the adult. You've seen the adult. What happens when the Wi-Fi gets cut off? You want to see radicalization? You've seen it. You see how people react viscerally. It's not like a gradual whatever. It's like a 0 to 100 right away. Addiction in adults. The kids are watching us. They're seeing us. They're just doing exactly what we're doing. But the problem for them is because their brains are very small and prefrontal cortex is not developed and that long-term critical thinking is not there. It has to be taught in them. So what we're seeing today is, I think, a crisis of epistemology. The very sources of our knowledge, how we come to know something, is all up in the air now. You don't know what to believe anymore. As adults, especially those who study disinformation and how all this stuff is put out there, and you see adults like reposting all kinds of nonsense. Like if it sounds like really crazy, it probably is. It's probably not true. And so that's the answer to that question. But can I just very quickly on what David was saying about, and I want to support his point, and I want to just, when we talk about Muslim Brotherhood and their infiltration attempts and this and that, like this stuff they put in writing many years ago. This is not a conspiracy theory. Now, from Islamic perspective, the politicization of religion, I might be biased because I come from like Sufi perspective, so for us we believe like religion is something you and the creator, but we consider politicization of religion like blasphemy. Rendering the creator into a political platform is crazy to us. So I don't want you to think that when you know what Muslim Brotherhood does, they put this in writing, this is their strategy, they have other groups that they animate. This is not against Islam. Like Islam has been around a long time, long before political groups came about. So don't confuse the two, right? It is very real what the Muslim Brotherhood is doing. And just that point about on campuses, inserting people into school boards, into this place, into that place, and now you're only going to look at certain things, and like they do this deliberately. This is a known thing. So we're not going to mention organization names maybe, but there's a well-known organization in America, rhymes with pear. I was in Canada when I'll just say it. I was in Canada when CARE America was looking to open a Canadian chapter. It was going to be called CARE Canada. How do I know? Because I was one of the people who were going to run it. It's not a conspiracy theory. I've seen it with my own eyes. It's real. So.
Can I add on something that Mubin said? Sorry, Heidi. It was about your question. So one of the things that Mubin was talking about is the social media. Those are echo chambers of hate. And back to the point about how we're not teach our kids critical thinking and identifying propaganda, it actually doesn't start in higher education. It starts in K-12. It starts with all of you. And I have 2 young kids in K-12, and I'm very attuned to what's going on there. And I'm in Massachusetts, so I can talk about Massachusetts, but they're not teaching them critical thinking. And unfortunately, they're teaching them also very specific content. And as a parent, I can tell you that we are now reviewing curriculums to make sure that our kids are safe. Because think about it, you send your kids to school, and that's their safe space. That's where they spend most of the day. I would like to think that my kids are safe. But when a teacher come and share, in my opinion, not in a responsible way, a very one-sided narrative, a very specific narrative, then now some kids are actually not safe. And especially when you're talking about war and you're talking about the Middle East, if we're talking specifically about that, you need to be so nuanced, right? I mean, experts cannot really explain it completely. So yet alone someone who just read something on a website and think, oh, now I know what I'm talking about. So in my work, because I work mostly with K-12, the kids in my clinic are terrified. I see school avoidance, depression, anxiety, self-harm, all the way to actually suicidal ideation, because kids are afraid of going to school and being bullied not by their peers, but by their teachers.
Thank you, Miri. So we're going to move the conversation more into the effects of social media by going to clip number 2, please, Dylan.
When Jews die, a lot of people get excited. That is not uncommon on social media platforms. But then we started seeing how certain online platforms were creating almost like a connective online space for activists and terrorists. Not only is there calls for events by American anti-Israel activists, but like Hamas communiques and other terrorist propaganda. I mean, it's mixing it all up so that people don't even recognize what is extremist and anti-Semitic anymore, because it's all existing in the same space. I mean, let's just face it, the imagery and the language of revolution and of change that they're putting into their pro-terror narratives, it creates something that is intriguing to people.
Foreign state and non-state actors are trying to influence and foment hate, extremism, anti-Semitism, and to include anti-American, anti-Western, anti-US sentiment.
If the Chinese Communist Party owns Sky, the BBC, ABC, NBC, Netflix, Amazon Prime, Apple TV+, would we be okay with that? Because they do for people under the age of 25.
People my age do not read the news, they do not read books, they do not read scholarly articles. They watch short form content on apps like TikTok and Instagram, and they take what they see to be true.
The fact that we have put the leading news source for the most impressionable minds in our society in the hands of our leading foreign adversary, like, historians will remember that as a colossal strategic miscalculation that we will live to regret.
Dr. Jaramillo and Dr. Shone, taking in everything you've heard so far and adding on to it sort of the environments that you see in the schools in your districts, tell us a little about, so and going backwards a little bit in time, about almost 2 years ago now, Sherry and I were in a room of administrators and teachers who were very candid with us about, you know, the increase of hatred, all forms of hatred on their campuses, and how many teachers, because they're not active in the social media spaces, were really disconnected from what their students were engaging with regularly. And they also didn't really have the time or capacity or resources or maybe even interest to go into social media land and understand where the children were getting information from. So I'd love if you could speak a little bit about your experience with that in your districts, what pitfalls of social media you've seen, what programs you put in place to mitigate these sort of things, and who do you need to be doing the work with you to make that safe, inclusive space for all the students of Alhambra and Pomona. So whomever would like to go first.
Thank you. Wow, I'm learning a lot already. My gosh. You know, it's no surprise to me that LACOE is sponsoring this, right? Because I know the work we do in K-12 really, really makes a profound difference. And we have a responsibility to support our kids in a world they don't understand and we quite don't understand, right? So in Alhambra, our work is kind of centered in 5 areas, and I'll weave in the social media in just a second. But you know, the first area is we know the responsibility we have to ensure that every child is connected to their school, maybe their church, or to their family, or there's somewhere, some affinity, some affiliation where they achieve a level of recognition and success. And so individually, we look at how we get kids connected. Secondly is We know that kids today, they need a voice, and they need the ability to have some agency in what happens in their world. So we have intentional programs and services set up for that as well. Third thing is, and Dr. Miri, I think that we've kind of hit the nail on the head this one. We believe kids have to be directly instructed, right? We teach critical thinking. Many of our programs throughout the day are infused in critical thinking, but we do direct instruction on hate. We do direct instruction on, we have an anti-bias project I'm incredibly proud of, but we believe children need to be taught, you know, what these harmful words that they may hear on social media or they may hear in music, they need to be taught the history, and we have a program we've developed, 3rd through 8th grade, that we actually teach that. The fourth thing that we think is there's got to be a level, because kids are going to step out. They're going to do something that's not right, right? That's what happens when you're growing up. So we believe for every kid there has to be, and this is a hard one for adults, right? We're used to discipline. We're used to kids do wrong and then you discipline, you give consequence. But we believe kids have to have a level of restoration and reconciliation back into. So we don't practice a whole lot of exclusionary practices. And so it's one-on-one. And then the fifth area we really look at is the adults. And it's the teachers, the educators that work with our children, and it's the parents. And we do not know what's happening on social media. And so in Alhambra, we've got a couple things to help us. One, we've developed something it's called Plus. It's a huge program in our district. We seek out students that we need to connect, but that we think we can build to be leaders. And we do leadership training with them. We do anti-bullying campaigns with them that they spread to the school. And we just had a Plus forum on Tuesday. I was there. We had 400 kids there. It's really a profound program. It's doing really well for us. But the other thing we've done is we've developed a set. It may sound a little disconnected, but it really isn't. We've got communications interns throughout our district. My PIO, we've got kids monitoring the social media and seeing what our kids are seeing. And remember I talked agency and voice? They're bringing to us the issues that are plaguing our children so that we can work, through our PTAs. But we see what's happening with social media. And I'm gonna remind our educators, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. Like COVID, we put a device in the hand of every single kid, didn't we? At 5 years old, we had devices. 2 years ago, I would have walked into classrooms very proud, maybe 3 years ago, very proud that I saw a device in every single kid's hand, and we touted that on, we patted ourselves on the back for that. But today I walk in those classrooms and we ask that those devices aren't used all day. There has to be a very specific reason for those devices to be used, a very specific platform. And we even have parents who say, don't send the device home. We don't want that in our home. There's got to be another way for my child to get what we're delivering. So those are some things in Alhambra. I could talk all day about our programs. But I will end with K-12. We have to be intentional. And I think as a profession, I can certainly say as a district, we have been intentional. And we don't know it all. And we are learning every single day on it. But I go to the very fundamental. Every student needs a relationship with someone, and we need to be that relationship and not leave it to chance that it's someone out on a device and who knows who they are.
Thank you. Those sounded like incredible programs. Dr. Shone, I'd love to hear from you as well.
Very similar with Dr. Jaramillo. In Pomona, we have been very intentional in shifting from isolated initiatives into connected system of equity and belonging. I'm going to give you one example. For us, our cornerstone, we call it CARES. And CARES stands for not the care that Mubin was talking about. CARES with S, it stands for Culturally Responsive Anti-Racist and Equitable Systems, right? It's not a program, rather it's a framework of how we do things in Pomona, how we lead, how we teach, how we engage each other. We've also expanded our restorative justice circles to move from schools to district and into the community. So we partnered with City of Pomona, and we actually started what we call Compassionate Pomona, where the premise is kindness, just be kind, right? Coupled with our decade-long implementation of positive behavior intervention and support, which of course we're partnered with LACOE. We were very intentional a decade ago when we implemented PBIS, right? We started with a foundation of equity and social justice, but we need to constantly reframe that so that the lens is focused on cultural responsiveness and not just as a behavioral management tool, but rather what Dr. Jaramillo said, it's relationship-centered approach. We also implemented ethnic studies, right? Again, echoing Alhambra, we wanted to make sure that every student's voice is reflected in our curriculum. I think, I'm coming in with my positionality here as, as a leader that I call, again, trying to define the term co-conspirator at heart. Not your co-conspirator, David, but one that is side by side as an in the struggle with our students. So I don't take lightly this responsibility of educating children, and more so also for higher education with adult learners. Especially in this time where truth is under attack, right? We can't even say equity, inclusion, empathy. And so building those emotionally safe environment and culturally affirming ones and consistent, right? Consistent spaces, as you said earlier, about where students feel like they belong and that it's not conditional and they're seen, heard, and valued. And wanted to end with, because I'm moved by your story, Mubin, and when you said about where it started for you and your roots, it's really about that, right? How much your identity is affirmed in spaces like school. So when I say I am a co-conspirator at heart, I walked every day, every campus, even though I'm at a district level, but I was also at a school site and I was a teacher as well, really walking in the shoes of our most vulnerable population and asking myself, what does it feel like to be you in our system, right? And coaching our courageous leaders to do just the same. Listen to their stories, listen to the student voice, and make those voices come alive and be empowered through the systems that we create.
David, go for it.
Sorry, Heidi. When we talk about social media and kids, just to me, rabbits run everywhere. So which terrorist group do you think sort of took advantage of social media to make terrorism appealing? Which one? ISIS. What? ISIS. Bingo, right? You get a coupon. 2014, ISIS made social media cool. As you remember, they were working their way through Syria, went into Iraq. They were calling on people to come to Syria to join the caliphate. And one need that they had and they were able to fulfill is having people that were really good with English, because they knew that they needed to be appealing to Western countries. And so the propaganda that they put out, it was creative, I'll give it to them, and it was super appealing. Hamas, after 10/7, these organizations that are here in the U.S. that were behind a lot of the college campuses stuff, they do the same thing. So to me, they kind of picked up what ISIS had started. If you look at 10/7 and the type of attack that they did and the way they murdered people, Hamas didn't do that really before. Which terrorist group tortured people? ISIS. There's probably reasons why, whether it be ISIS fighters got with Hamas or Hamas saw that that's how the new way is to torture and kill people. And so those are a lot of the tactics that they did. You can look at a lot of the interrogations of Hamas fighters after 10/7, and the interrogators are asking them, you tell me the difference between you and ISIS. And a lot of them, they're like, well, there really is no difference, based off how we did the attack. And the second piece to that, so kids see that, kids here in the West, they see how appealing that is. They see an attack, they see some form of hate, and there's really no accountability because it's on social media. really, my kids hate it, but I'm not a really big fan. The only benefit I saw of social media was my 80-year-old grandmother was able to reconnect with people she hasn't seen in 40 years. Other than that, I don't really know the benefit of it. I know that's probably not a popular opinion. But again, kids aren't really accountable. And so you'd have kids that would, prom's coming up, and so they would post on social media because they're trying to find their identity, and their identity is on social media. You look at the parents are on social media as much as the kids, so there's a lot of issues with this. But kids will post like, hey, I'm gonna shoot up prom. And the FBI would get notified of it, and then we go through all this work, we identify, the 15-year-old that posted that, we go find them and interview them. They're like, oh, I was just kidding. So the way Florida dealt with that the last few years is they just started arresting the children and prosecuting them at the state level and removing them from their schools and putting them in the other, the schools where all the bad kids go. Which really, that was the one thing that we found that parents hated the most, was the fact that they were being relocated to a different school, which is again another conversation. But the fact that they make terrorism or violence appealing and cool has been a problem for the last probably 10 years.
So I know Miri wants to say something, but just very quickly, so you just told the anecdote of Florida of putting young people into the juvenile detention system, and Dr. Jaramillo and Dr. Shone were just talking about exactly the opposite approach to this. I'm wondering if anyone has anything to say about that.
I don't think we're just now realizing Florida probably does things different.
It doesn't have to be about Florida, just it's two very different approaches to the same problem, and maybe Miri has the answer. And
we do it differently in Parents for Peace. We actually go with the school approach, and I think it depends also, are you a first offender or not a first offender? There's so many different aspects to come with it, and did you break the law or didn't break the law? I think as a school system, we want to thrive to give people the option to repair. And especially as adolescents, and we share cases where stupid kids wrote stupid stuff on social media and everywhere else, and they get in trouble. I would say schools are striving to be trauma-informed environment. We definitely want to make sure that we give them education so they're not going to follow through with it again and be able to repair the damage they were done and not just punish, because when you shame someone and you punish someone, you actually push them farther into the extremism. So I don't know if it's answering the question, but I will say something about that. Well, David, what you're saying. So I'm going to put my geeky head on of a trauma expert for a second. The word terror actually comes from the Latin word terre, which means to frighten. And what Hamas did on October 7th and what ISIS did is they changed the rules of the game in a way, because they were using social media to show all the atrocities they were doing, and they made it cool, like David was saying. But in the trauma world, when we think about people that are affected by trauma, there's direct exposure and indirect exposure. And we used to think in the field that if you're not directly exposed to the event, then you're going to have less trauma symptoms. For example, a lot of studies that were done after 9/11 show that the closer in proximity you are to the event, you're going to have more symptoms. And if you're watching it on TV, you might have symptoms, but not as much. On October 7th, because everything was broadcast, people actually had PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms, even if they were not in Israel. So when you think about the effect of October 7th, there's two. One is the mental health aspect of Jewish people around the world and Israelis, which is more of the mental health and the trauma that they're seeing. The other thing that is happening, and this is why I always say anti-Semitism and terrorism is not a Jewish problem. It's a non-Jewish problem that's affecting Jewish people, but it's also affecting non-Jews. Because we know that anti-Semitism is actually the gateway into radicalization. When we see the stuff on social media, we're becoming numb to it. It's like watching a movie. I think about a few months ago when there was the murder in the train in, where was it? The Ukrainian girl. In Charlotte. You watch it and people are not doing anything, right? We're so numb to seeing violence, and our kids are numb to seeing violence, but their brain is not fully developed to understand this is not a movie. This is real life. And this is where we have real problems, because the device we put on their hand because of COVID or because we want to make our life easier, it's like giving them, putting them in Mars and not knowing how they're going to respond to that. We're seeing the results of it now, but we're going to see more and more negative effect probably within the next few years as well. The more research is coming out about it.
So we're not totally, I have a question for you, so yes. So we're not totally powerless in all of this. So Mubin, so I'm glad you grabbed the mic. I want to know, share with us a little bit at Parents for Peace, how are you engaging and training parents to be effective in bringing their children back to safe ground? And who are the other partners that you need to do successful interventions? Maybe you'd share a specific example. And then after you've answered, I'd love Dr. Jaramillo and Dr. Shone to also share how you're working with parents in co-participating with the school districts to also address sort of alarming things that you're seeing. Mubin, please.
You're kind of reading my mind because I was gonna say, my comment was gonna be, I'll just make the comment, like, you know, educators, you're not cops, you're not spies, it's not ever your job. You have different tools that you're gonna bring to bear in your context. Obviously, law enforcement, that's their mandate. Did the person commit a crime? Yes, they did. There's a prosecution, lay a charge, so on and so forth. And I'm very frustrated with the way because no police agency is going to be wants to be responsible for the next school shooter. So they are going to err on the side of caution. They're probably going to charge the person, and once that process begins, it's a very long process. So just right into that question about what do we do with parents. So Miri and I happened to be on a case where this happened, where the FBI case the federal case was going away, and they didn't like that, not the FBI, the government, let's just, an ambiguous they didn't like that. So this kid was in Department of Juvenile Justice. They were very devious the way that they, control yourself, Mubin. They deceived us the way that they did it. I don't have much respect for the way in which they conducted themselves. They basically let him go. Look at what they did. They're like, we're letting you go. He dealt with us, so we did one-on-one interventions with him. Miri and I, sometimes just me, Miri with the parents, me and both of us with the parents. And they were like, oh, we're gonna let you go with no conditions, which we found odd because what we liked to see is the courts actually say, okay, you need to speak with Parents for Peace for the next whatever it is. They let him go, and as soon as he left the room, the state agents were there, and they just prosecuted him on a state charge. So parents, when they all the time, parents are completely blindsided by this stuff. They're trying to be good parents, right? We got one case, the kid said he was 14 when he came to us, wanted to stab a Jewish kid in the head, and that's what kind of got him in autism spectrum disorder. And I'm not an expert on autism, and believe me, I learned a lot dealing with this kid. Because it's like, I'm used to like the person who's ideologically engaged with the ideology. ASD, well, especially where he is specifically on that spectrum, it's very mechanical movements. So for example, when it got to court, the prosecutor came out and she's like, told the judge, look at all the searches that this kid made. And there were like over 1,000 searches. And they're like every single FBI flagged term you can imagine, he was searching it. But when I looked at the sheet, I was like, hold on, look at the time that he spent on each web page. Microseconds. Like, you can't read 5 words in that sentence. You and me as an adult could not read 4 words in that sentence in that amount of time. So this kid is not engaging with the material. He's going through a mechanical process of just, I need to search up Al-Qaeda related stuff, Salafi related stuff. And he was just clicking away. Lovely Christian, African-American Christian family, such lovely people. And they're trying to be good parents and like, oh, my kid wants to be Muslim. Okay, how can we support our son and da-da-da, and not realizing sometimes like, what do we even do with this? I'm not a racist. I'm not a bigot. I don't want to say, oh no, you can't be Muslim, that's wrong. Or it kind of reminds me of like, it was a British commercial and it was like a back and forth between a mother and daughter. And it's like, you're not wearing that to school. Mom, you can't tell me what I can wear or not wear to school, blah, blah, blah. And it goes on and on and on until the end. She's like, take that hijab off now. And it was like, I was like, holy, that's cool how they did that, because that was the conversation with miniskirts in like, whenever that was, 70s, right? So parents who want to be, but then they see this, like, what do they do? So we do try to help the parents, like safety plans are very important where there is a risk of violence in the case. So we do a lot of cross-training, in behavioral threat assessment and management, and we all come from our different backgrounds and specializations. And safety plans are a big thing. So in this kid, in the autism case, this kid was like very smart, like he hacked into the Xbox to use the Wi-Fi. Because he wanted to stab the Jewish kid in the head, we were telling him like, okay, well, parents, make sure you know where the knives are, keep them in a box. They actually had to keep all the knives in a box. The kid tried to break into the box, and then he saw that there were obvious signs of attempted break-in in the box, so then he just blurted it out and admitted it to his parents, which is good. That's good, but it shows you what you need to do at that level. So parents, safety plan, even how they respond. So like Miri was saying, you're not going to shame them into anything. That it will turn them the other way, right? Like what I told you about my story, like the shame and the guilt propelled me into that thing. And I've learned a lot, like with Parents for Peace, like how to deal with my own kids and dealing with my own kids and working with Parents for Peace, like what works, what doesn't work. And we tell them all the time, don't go down the argument rabbit hole. You'll never win that battle. You want to ask them, and this applies to educators, you want to force them to ask questions. Everybody, even adults, we're on this default of like, you know it, you've done it, and you've seen it being done. A person is talking, the other person is listening, not listening, but listening so that to respond to them. Like there's no like, let me, and I was saying this yesterday, like when I don't want to talk to somebody, if they're going on and on, I just be like, that's really fascinating. I want to process this. Let's pause the conversation here, because when I go home tonight, I'm gonna think about this for a long time. I'm gonna read about stuff, I'm gonna look up stuff, and I'm still not gonna come up with an opinion. I might write down what I feel like my opinion is, and then I'm gonna go back and look at it. So teaching these tactics, these techniques to parents is the same thing as for educators. Last thing on the parents thing is, so safety plan, don't engage in argumentation with them. And the biggest thing that unfortunately a lot of kids are missing is love from their parents. Just love. Like kids, they don't get enough of that in many cases, you know that. And parents, they might have their own trauma stories, and they were conditioned that way, and maybe that's how their parents treated them, and they're just repeating the cycle. So you have to really, like, you don't know where that kid is coming from, or that parent, right? And so to try to be aware of all these possibilities that are happening in their life is going to equip you to respond much better.
It's a lot. So that's a lot to put on teachers, right? So what are your roles in supporting those teachers do what Mubin just said?
Well, in Pomona, maybe I should ground it with a paraphrase of Dr. Martin Luther King's approach about darkness cannot be extinguished by darkness. Only light can extinguish darkness. So our approach is education, empowering, and restoration, right? I talked about the restorative practices earlier. We educate, we actually built in our system a curriculum, many of you may be familiar, the Common Sense Media, to build their digital citizenship so they're more aware of what's going on and so forth. And also train our staff to respond to misinformation, not with hate or panic, but with clarity and compassion. So that's one. I'm gonna lead back to a little bit about the parents as well. For our parents, the good thing is whatever we're doing with our teachers and supporting them, like professional learning, equity-centered coaching, we also do with our parents, right? There are various courageous conversation protocols that we use and train our teachers, staff, and leaders, like that one with Glenn Singleton about courageous compass conversations, so that we can continue to have those dialogues and understand each other. Nancy Domes, Dr. Nancy Domes, RIR, very similar to what you talked about earlier, Dr. Jaramillo, recognize, interrupt, repair. Anybody can do that in the system, right? And there's that great resource, you guys are also probably familiar, Learning for Justice, Speak Up at School, which is very similar to interrupt, educate, echo, and I'm missing one letter. The approach is really to be proactive and preventative. So our parents are partners, and we don't wait until there's a crisis before we partner with them. So by the time that there is a crisis like that, escalation of incidents in schools, we already have built trust, because we know that misinformation is not just a tech problem, it is a trust problem. So building schools that are, again, culturally affirming, trusting, and consistent in supporting our families and students, both online and offline, is the key.
Well, we're probably very similar, and Mubin, we talk a lot about getting parents in schools, because we know it's so basic, but we all know it, right? The more connected a family is to the school, that's the way kids see love, when parents show up, right, at the school. So we do very simple things, the family literacy nights and the math, very simple stuff that gets families in. And then it kind of builds up like a pyramid based on need. Where Alhambra is unique, maybe not unique for LA County, but perhaps unique in other spaces, is we serve so many different languages and cultures. So one thing that, and I'm sure Pomona is the same, we're very, very intentional in ensuring that the people that really interact with families that find themselves in a harder space are people that culturally can speak the language, and so it's not through a translation, because you gotta be connecting with parents, because when kids find themselves in a difficult space, it's affecting that entire family. And I have yet to meet a family that is proud when they walk in when their child has done something that's harmful to someone else. So we have many education opportunities for parents. We share all of the curriculum, we get input from them, all the things all of our LACOE schools do. But one thing I'm very proud of with Alhambra, we're very individual with our students, and we're very individual with our parents, and that's what it takes. I guarantee you, a parent can reach a principal, they can reach a teacher, they can reach me, and we talk to people individually about what they're needing, and then we don't pretend we have it all. We connect highly with the resources within our community, multiple mental health agencies. We do not exclude law enforcement from conversations, because there are times that law enforcement needs to be there, and we find that they can play a keen role in it. And then we listen to parents, because there are times they'll call and say, you know what, you got it wrong, and we try to reflect on that and help improve in that way.
Yes, David.
Sorry, Heidi, this is the last time I'll add. So one thing with parents and kids, and it's not everywhere, and I don't work for the FBI anymore, and I'm still in transition, so I still refer back to FBI stuff. But what we did in Jacksonville is that, and not every field office was doing it, but it was hugely successful with parents, is at the beginning of the school year, we would get with the school boards, and we would plan out an event, and it was called Be Smart with Your Smartphone. And so the response that we got, we would have, so that the school board would advertise it and market it through the schools. That would get the parents there. We would go to an auditorium, and we would have 400 parents show up in a very small school district. And then we would bring, FBI agents, because this kind of overlaps. We're talking about terrorism and radicalization, but with young kids, it also goes to the Gore groups, and I don't know if you've had like sextortion cases where subjects from different Gore groups, 764, 09A, they're targeting your children and exploiting them by having them send inappropriate photographs, and then they'll, want money from them if they don't, pay this. If you don't pay this money, I'm going to send that photo to everyone in your Instagram list or whatever. Kids don't know what to do with that. Some of them will go to their parents. Some of them would kill themselves. Some of them would steal money to then just pay off the ransom. And so we would have these events where, again, hundreds of parents would show up, which was indicative that parents want to know. They want to obviously help their children. They would show up. We would have experts like this and agents, and we would just walk them through over a couple hours. Like, hey, here's the different apps. Here's how this works. Here's who's targeting your children. Here's how your children are responding to it. And then typically after an event, we would have a line of parents who would talk, like, I have that, my kid has this, and then we would open cases from that. So that was just one thing that we did that we thought was
Thank you, David. Actually, maybe you'll fit into the next section, because I'm looking at the time. So we've just heard so many incredible programs and techniques and how it really takes a village to take care of our young people, and that we all have to be at attention and engage with all the different modalities we have to create these safe spaces for our children and for ourselves. But truth be told, in the past, well, since 2021, but longer than that, we've seen a steady increase in a particular type of hatred. And it's so interesting because, Miri, you're sitting right next to me, so you're supporting me. But even the having to talk about this, I feel my heart start to pound, right? Because it's so upsetting, so sensitive, so difficult the past few years to be a Jewish person and to be gaslit or to be denied the reality of what's happening, or to be told what you see isn't true, what you say isn't true. To be told that, no, you're not the narrator of your story. I am, because I read something on social media, et cetera, and so on. So we're going to bring that elephant into the room, and we're going to start talking about anti-Semitism, which is very sneaky, and it morphs and mutates like the most brilliant virus. So Dylan, please show clip number 4.
The first phase of anti-Semitism is peoplehood. There are reports of Alexandria 300 BC of people saying, who is this weird people? When Christianity appeared, anti-Semitism turned into religious anti-Semitism. So the whole concept of the Jews killed Christ, it was all about religious persecution of the Jewish people. Then anti-Semitism morphed again into racial anti-Semitism. The tricky part about that shape-shifting is that you can't convert out of it. So once you're racially Jewish, doesn't matter what percentage of Jew you have on you, you're done. That was the third iteration, obviously it created the Holocaust. The fourth iteration of anti-Semitism is anti-Zionism.
Once you normalize Zionism equals apartheid, Zionism equals genocide, and that person is a Zionist, then I can do a lot to that person. That justifies a lot. And attacking that person in any way I choose to attack them becomes defensible.
Zionists don't deserve to live. The existence of Nazis, white supremacists, Zionists, these are all the same people. The existence of them and the projects they have built, i.e. Israel, it's all antithetical to peace. It's all antithetical to peace. And so, yes, I feel very comfortable calling for those people to die.
The anti-Semitism we see from the left doesn't surprise me because I've been tracking it for years. But I used to talk about a political spectrum from far right to far left and where you find anti-Semitism on the political spectrum. I've changed that. I now talk about a horseshoe. And you know, the two ends of a horseshoe are magnetic. And you would think, how would the far, far left and the far, far right share views on anything? They don't, except in this regard.
In recent years, when I would try to tell people that anti-Zionism is the worst part of anti-Semitism today, they would point out to an easy-to-identify anti-Semitism like Marjorie Taylor Greene. It's very easy for every one of us to be like, oh yeah, that's anti-Semitism. Or Jews will not replace us.
You will not replace us!
That's overtly right-wing anti-Semitism. We understand this, we know this, it's very easy for us to point that out. But what was very difficult for a lot of people in polite society is to identify what it changed to today.
We have raised this generation to stand up against social injustice. And I think that they have understood a lot of oppression through a construct of race. That construct does not apply to the Middle East. Like, I am not white, and most people in Israel are not white.
Hey, this is me, the Zionist Israeli, the white colonialist settler occupier. When you describe Zionism as this white imperialist idea, you actively delete the history of black and brown Jews.
So Miri, you have this really powerful way of describing anti-Semitism as this connective tissue sort of binding all hatreds together, and it leads to many other things. So I'd love Miri, Mubin, David, just converse about what's happening today, about where we are with anti-Semitism, and talk amongst yourselves. And I'll pipe in if I feel like we need to focus more on something that someone is saying.
Can I pause for the cause first? Just hearing you describing what you're going through by talking about it, that is the outcome of anti-Semitism. And what you were describing before was what I do in my research. It's called traumatic invalidation. When someone is politicizing your pain, denying your pain, blaming you for your pain, telling you it didn't happen. I'm an Israeli immigrant. After October 7th, a few weeks into it, I sat with my husband, who is not Jewish, he's American, he's not Israeli, and I told him, Derek, I feel like I'm going crazy. I feel like everything I grew up on was a complete lie. And I grew up in a very, peace, two-state solution environment. I was in Seats for Peace and Paris Seats for Peace, all of that. And I told him that I need to do my deep dive and actually read books like Mubin, not just social media or TikTok, but actual books just to confirm my own history. And that's what traumatic invalidation does. It's this constant fear, hypervigilant, insecurity, not knowing if that person is silent because they're against me or because you don't know what to say, not knowing when you're entering spaces, are you going to be attacked because you're Jewish, you don't belong Israeli, being boycotted? I've been boycotted because of my last name. You heard in the video how she was saying you're denying who I am. I'm a trauma expert. I worked really hard to build my career for over 2 decades. But because I'm Jewish, people will not come to have a conversation with me. I'm an author, I'm a public speaker, I know what I'm talking about. It took me a year to finally publish my paper about traumatic invalidation in the Jewish community. And it was important for me that it will be in a journal, it's academic peer-reviewed, because I knew they're going to invalidate it. And they did, but okay. But that's what anti-Semitism is doing to people. And I don't care if you call it anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, whatever you want to call it. If someone is telling you, I don't feel safe, if a student is telling you, it's hurting me, you can't start doubting them. You're supposed to support them. You're not going to start arguing with them, well, actually, this is just anti-Zionism, this is a criticism of Israel. No, I'm telling you, I'm not feeling safe. So when you think about anti-Semitism and how it's the connective tissue, like you've seen in the video, in Parents for Peace, we have a helpline, and people would call and say, I'm worried about my loved one being radicalized. And every phone call we get, or the majority, about 97% of the phone call we get, far left, far right, Antifa, eco-terrorism, what they all have in common is anti-Semitism. And it's really not just ruining the Jewish families, as we were saying before. We have cases where the kid is in jail because of anti-Semitism. Families are being ruined. So it is absolutely, in my opinion, right now a pandemic, and it deserves to be treated on a systematic level. It is starting with education. It's starting with all of you educators in this room, not to be afraid to talk about it. It's not political to talk about anti-Semitism. It is important to talk about anti-Semitism. It's important to say what it is. It is important to say what anti-Zionism and modern anti-Semitism is, because if we're walking on eggshells, if we're not talking about it directly, we're becoming part of the problem. We need to name it in order to repair it, and we need to name the harm in order to heal from the harm.
Once upon a time, I was an Army cadet. In you guys call it a junior ROTC here. I was in the Army Cadets. I was 16 years old. I was on a bunk, like I had a bunk mate, and his last name was Chemnitz. Martin Chemnitz showed up at Army Cadet Camp with a tattoo of Hitler boiling people in a cauldron. He had to keep it covered with a gauze the whole summer. And he was my bunkmate. And when I went up to him and I said, hey, you and I gonna have problems? And he goes to my, the piece of masking tape with the marker with my name on it, and he's like, Sheikh, is you Arab, Muslim? I was like, yeah, Muslim. He goes, you hate Jews, right? I ain't got a problem with you. Good ending. I met Martin Chemnitz at a rave a couple of years later. And he had I don't know if she was from South Sudan or Ghana, but like very dark skinned girlfriend. And he's loving the rave, and so I guess rave de-radicalized him, I don't know. When I talk to these kids, so I'm building up to this. When I talk to these kids, I love using this example because both sides kind of like, huh? I tell them, I always start with something, brother, there's this Muslim general. He has this Jewish confidant. He's not just any Jew, he's a rabbi. He picked this rabbi over a Muslim. What do you think of this general? 100% of the time, he's kafir. The one who sits with the kafir, he's a kafir. I said, interesting, because I'm talking about Salah ad-Din, and the rabbi is Maimonides. You can't open the Jewish Bible without seeing a reference to Rambam, right? And you don't got better jihadi credentials than Salah ad-Din. I mean, he defeated the Crusaders, so. But the point is, and there was another one that I used recently after the October 7 attacks, and because some people were like, sorry, I'm having a little bit of a migraine, it's weird. I don't know if it's the jet lag or I don't know, the lights maybe. So they were like, oh, these Arabs, they're just interested in buying weapons from the Jews. So I said, oh, that's funny because the Prophet, alayhi salam, bought weapons from the Jews. And they're stunned. They don't know. My approach is to, educate people. You have to teach, people need to learn the history, the real history of how things went. I hate this idea, I know I use the word hate, severely dislike how we have broken, I don't know, come from religious perspective, the Abrahamic family, right? The children of Abraham are behaving like Abel and Cain, right? Just trying to kill each other. There's so many historical things that we need to educate our people about. Zionism. Remember what I said at the beginning? I was like, once you can justify atrocities against people, once you say that they're this, and whatever this is, use the worst words you can think of. Genocide, this, that, like, you just go right to 100. So when people say, like, Zionism, like, I had to go through this with myself. Like, what are they talking about? What is this Zionism thing that's just so different that they even say, no, I'm not against Jews, I'm against the Zionists. I was like, what does Zionism mean? It's just a basic belief that the Jews should have autonomy in their ancestral lands. Some people don't like to hear this, and I'm just going to say it because you need to hear it. Facts don't matter when it comes to a lot of this stuff, right? Talking about Palestine, Palestinian flag, this and that. Like, you have to understand, like, here's the religious side that I use. I'm like, okay, you say Palestine in English. What do we call it in Arabic? Philistine. Okay. In the Quran, the prophet David, alayhi salam, peace be upon him, defeats the Philistines and Goliath, who was their hero and their champion. So let me get this right. You are taking the name of a nation that Allah, we believe as Muslims, Allah caused to be destroyed by a prophet of God. Number two, that Palestinian flag, look, Mark Sykes, Allah Sykes and Pico, right? So that area was called Sham, according to the Islamic terminology. The Romans called it Palestine, once upon a time, Syria, Palestina, and they did it to erase Jewish identity in the lands, because the Romans eventually, they destroyed the temple and they banished the Jews from Jerusalem, 70 of the Common Era. Now it gets used again by the British, right? So it's called Al-Sham, and then the British call it the British Mandate for Palestine. So who created this name Palestine? It's cute when people, they show, look at this photo from, 19 pre whatever. It was called Palestine. See? Yeah, British Mandate for Palestine. The British created that name Palestine. So in this talk about colonialists or colonization and decolonization and all of that, actually Palestine is the colonial entity by the arch colonizer Britain. Sykes and Picot, the ones who drew the boundaries and the lands, and the Ottoman Empire lands are divided between the British, the Russians, and the French. Mark Sykes, the British diplomat, created the flags of the Arab Revolt. Look it up if you need to. The flags of the Arab Revolt. That's why the flag of Palestine, UAE, Jordan, they all look the same. Black, green, red, white. Those were the flags of the Arab Revolt, literally created by a British colonizer. So, now those are the facts. You're not, I don't know if you'll get anywhere with that, but this is the approach that I've taken. Go to a factual level, those of you who are educators, and you don't want to engage in an argument like this with people, but you can ask them. It's like, well, what do you know about this word? What do you know about this flag? You're using these terms, like colonialism is really bad and all this and that, but it's like, I even say, when I had these conversations with Muslims, it's like, do you forget what we did in the world? As Muslims? When we say that Islam controlled most of the world at the time, yeah, it wasn't through rainbows and lollipops. We sent armies to places. We took over places. There's a reason why people in Bulgaria or in the Balkan regions don't like Muslims. It's because of what the Ottomans did to them. So having these sorts of conversations, sometimes you got to be brutally honest. You can tell that's the way that I am. I try to be nicer about it because I'm Canadian. So.
Yeah, and I just want to add, I agree that we're not in a time where facts matter, and so getting in those arguments doesn't necessarily go anywhere. And the truth is, today we have two really beautiful peoples who have to figure it out because no one's really going anywhere, and that's where we have to go, somewhere together. David, do you want to add?
Yeah, I'm not going to speak as eloquently as Miri. That was a great job. And then I just put a pin on what Mubin said. He said early on. So the first half of my career was investigating Hamas Muslim Brotherhood. Spoke to a lot of Hamas folks. The second half was working more jihadists, Al-Qaeda and ISIS. I've spent many hours with many of them in very crappy places overseas as they were taken off the battlefield. One commonality that they all have, they all don't like each other. They're like gangs. So Al-Qaeda doesn't like ISIS. Al-Qaeda was not happy that ISIS was created. Hamas has its own issues with Hezbollah. But what it comes down to is they have a common enemy, and it's Israel and it's the U.S. For 19 years of all the hours I spent with them, that's where it usually would go to. So that's what we're dealing with. And the second thing is the normalization of hate that kind of makes it cool to hate people. We're talking about anti-Semitism, to hate Jews. You have a group of people, 18, 19, 20, 21 years old on college campuses. And why do you think they responded that way? Why do you think they responded that way? Any ideas? What's that? Empathy? Some are being paid. Some are probably paid. When you were that age, did you think you could do it better than your parents? Right? The Islamists that are behind this are super calculated. They're very strategic. They are not dumb people. They know that. And so when they walk up to an 18-year-old on a college campus, they go, "Hey, are you for genocide?" And they're like, no, who would say yes, they're for genocide, right? So they're controlling the narrative. Well, you're not for genocide, then that's what Israel's doing. So now you're against Israel, and it takes off like wildfire.
David, you were worried, how are we going to fill the 2 hours? We're almost done, and there's so much more to talk about. So I want to know from Dr. Jaramillo and Dr. Shone, if when things like this, and you both expressed you haven't dealt exactly with these in your school districts, but let's say these sorts of things did come up and there were signs of extremism in schools, do you feel that you are in environments where you could have open, honest conversations with colleagues, with your teachers, with your staff? And then to Miri, based on response, what kind of environments do we need for everyone to be learning safely? Not just the students, but the teachers, the administrators, the whole campus environment.
I can start. As a superintendent, I don't claim to be an expert on a whole lot. You know, I do a lot of stuff, but I'm not an expert on any of it. But I've gotten really comfortable being uncomfortable. And so, do I think we can have conversations when there are extreme situations? Yes, I can. But I don't have to always be the expert delivering, right? So I am resourceful enough to know that I can bring together people who may be like-minded but who may be different and engage in conversation. But I know what works for me. I would never stand up, but I've done it and I live to regret it, in front of an audience and attempt to take on a difficult conversation. I would break it down into small pieces where people can exchange ideas, clarify concerns, and that's what, again, I'm really proud of Alhambra. That's what we do all the time. We take this big, massive system and we make it small. And we make it small for the adults, for the kids, for the staff. So do I think we could have conversation? Absolutely. Have we around really difficult topics? You betcha. To date, it's not been on anti-Semitism, but I think we could do it.
Similarly, for us, I know having conversations around open dialogue on anti-Semitism, racism, extremism, it can be very difficult, right? But in Pomona, as Dr. Jaramillo said, in Alhambra, we are okay with discomfort. We believe that discomfort is our starting point in the conversation. It's not a stopping point, right? And so working with partners as well, like Dr. Fergus, which we both work with, I could refer to that in terms of our training around what he claimed was when we show up in spaces, any spaces, and we have incidents like that, right? We don't show up empty-handed. We show up with what's inside our shopping carts, right? Our identities, our lived experience, our heritage, our communities. And so allowing spaces or safe spaces and bold spaces to be available for students to talk about what's in their shopping carts and begin to understand each other, right? Building those systems in place, as you said, deep listening, knowing what is hateful and hurtful, and addressing that by creating those systems in place to dismantle hate within our system.
Thank you, Miri.
So I don't think it should be difficult to talk about anti-Semitism, because schools can talk about racism, LGBTQ, and a lot of other things. I think avoiding talking about it, like I said before, is creating the problem. Schools should be trauma-informed. We strive to be trauma-informed. There are very specific criteria to be trauma-informed. You need to understand there is trauma, recognize the symptoms of trauma, respond in a way that is safe for everybody, and make sure there is no re-traumatization, physical space and emotional space. So it starts with looking around and trying to think, is there something in my school environment that is actually causing someone to feel unsafe or excluded? Now, I'm pro-Palestinian and I'm pro-Israeli. I'm not pro-Hamas. And when I brought my kids to school and I saw the flags, the first thing my eyes went to as an Israeli is to see, is there an Israeli flag? Are my kids going to feel that this is a place that is safe for them as well? And I think when we're having those conversations heads on, and listen, I'm direct, I'm Israeli, that's what we do. Then we can grow from them. Just like you were saying, having an uncomfortable conversation is the only way to move forward. And there's so much research about how to do it in a way that is nuanced and that is safe for everybody. So we, the adults in the room, the educator, the administration, the superintendent, the nurses, the people on the adults needs to be able to have this conversation in a safe way. The teachers need to have this conversation, because if you're not having this conversation, how are you expecting a kid to have this conversation? We need to be able to model that behavior. Oh, thank you over there. So being trauma-informed, being anti-bully, being anti-Semitism informed. As you heard from David, we're late for this game. We're like 30 years late for this game. Jews have been excluded from DAI spaces, unfortunately, in most places. I was a director of DAI in a company, and I did not even think of, oh, wait, I'm not included as a minority. We're championing for every other minority, but what about us? So listen, I'm one of many who made a career change to make sure that we stand up. We stand up for everybody, but everybody means Jews as well. Because my kids deserve to feel safe in a school environment. And your kids deserve not to be radicalized and deserve to know the truth about what's happening out there.
Thank you, Miri. One question. Is there one question? No. So can the panelists talk about how the political climate is contributing to all of the extremism that we see in all the places and spaces we inhabit, in some?
Can I just very quickly, because we're going to avoid the obvious political stuff. But why I wanted to jump at the question is, what does that mean, right? Political climate. What does that mean? Political climate. I used to have of course, and in high school I used to have a button. It said, "Nothing political is correct." Right? And I really dislike the idea of making decisions on the basis of political platforms. Like, you should do it on the basis of facts and what's good for the greater good, right? But what's happening is you're seeing the mechanisms of division, polarization, the radicalization. People, again, needing this, it's this need to be extreme in their whatever, in their positions. It's like you need to demonize the other person. It's not even like you're refuting the other person, debating the other person, even if it's to defeat them in debate. And if you can imagine, once upon a time, centuries ago, people would have public debates in the courts of the king, right? Even in the Islamic world, it's funny because the Muslims, we love to brag a lot about, how great we were back in the day. Make Islam great again, I guess. Slip that in there. And they had in the palace of the Sultan, they would have Jewish, Christians, Greeks. People would debate in front, like it was a show that people would do. We don't do enough of that anymore, like actual debating. So you can refute people, you can do all that, but unfortunately what the politics does, because you can also, politics is about power, and people who seek power, they oftentimes will try to acquire power by any means. And division, deception, radicalization are some of the ways in which that gets done. So a very general answer without, left, right, center, whatever. Just look at the way politics and politicians conduct themselves. And you can imagine how their thought process is also affected by that whole thing of acquiring power, keeping power, and so on. Thanks.
Yeah, so question power always, and where it's coming from and why they want it. Okay, so we are with 3 minutes to go. So what we're going to do to close is I'm going to ask each of you, starting with David, coming down to Miri, of everything that's been said tonight, what's the main message, idea, or suggestion that you'd like everyone to leave with to incorporate into their work in addressing hate in our learning environments and, by extension, our communities? David, please.
First off, you guys have an incredibly difficult job. Again, with young people today, every topic we talked about with social media, with politics, I think kids kind of emulate parents and everything else. And in today's society, everything is about as divided as you can get it. You couple that with the social media where it's cool to do these things and to push these messages, and with the nuclear family, I think not really what it used to be, then it falls to you guys. I mean, you're really probably the second group of people, if not the first group, that these young people spend as much time with parents having 2 jobs and single parent homes and everything else. The education is key, knowing what the truth is so you can have knowledgeable conversations with these young folks. Obviously, there's a line where you want them to explore their own thoughts and, have dialogue to where they question things, but you have to come from a place of knowledge and really know what the truth is. And it's hard with so much misinformation out there.
Thank you. For me, so grateful and humbled to be here. I think I'm leaving with my shopping cart really full from learning from all of you. And one of my greatest takeaway in just listening from everyone right now, what stood out to me is how the question, how do we lead with care in this time of division, right? How do we teach our students to do that? How do we empower our teachers to do so? I am convinced more than any other time, after tonight, more so that care is not a soft skill. It's actually a leadership strategy. And I want to anchor our my call to action to all of us here, because I think that's what we're called upon to do, is to put what matters most at the center of this, right? How to build, again, systems where all of our students are validated with their identities and they're seen, they're heard, they're supported, and they're affirmed every single time, and making spaces for those. But for us educators, not so much about the talking anymore. Be a co-conspirator, get out there, name the problem, and interrupt. Thank you.
Thank you. One of my challenges is choosing just one thing, so I could go with a list. I'm looking at my friend Michelle out here, and I was with Michelle in Israel in June or July of 2023, a phenomenal educational experience. And I remember we were up at the Sea of Galilee after this phenomenal trip, and we were talking about ethnic studies and all kinds of stuff, and what's one thing we took away from that trip? And I serve a community that does not have a large Jewish population. I could probably count on one hand the number of students in my community. And I remember I came back from that experience as we developed our ethnic studies. There's this natural propensity to teach children about their culture and the value and the contributions it's made. But that trip reminded me of my responsibility to help our children learn about things with which they are not familiar. And so I think that's one of the things I take away again, that I have to help our community. Social media can't be where they get all the information on what's happening in the Middle East. We have to help our children learn, and our adults, something with which we're not innately familiar in our community.
I remember in high school there was a course in media studies. It was the first time I ever took a course like that. I still remember it to this day. It was a critical view of look at the commercial. They looked at beer commercials and they were like, look at all these people in the beer commercials. They're all young, they're all pretty, they're all fit, right? And look at the message that it's giving you. That level of critical thinking, and even put into a popular culture setting, I think is one of the easiest ways to teach critical thinking skills to young people. When I do presentations on extremism for teenagers, if you see my slide deck, it's all memes. Use those things. If kids are learning from things like that, employ the tactics that they're using. Adapt yourself to what they're doing. And the second point is, you as educators, you're teachers, but you are also teaching yourself. When you are talking to a student and you, let's say, have a political opinion personally or whatever, and the student is kind of asking in such a way that they're challenging you, not even deliberately, they're genuinely like asking or whatever, what you may have to teach yourself, okay, how do I approach this in the most bias-free manner? Yeah, I have these views, I belong to this organization, this, that, and the other, but you gotta put all of that aside, and it requires practice. It is not something that you're just gonna learn in a teacher's course on a weekend, professional development, whatever. This is a lifelong thing that you need to do continually, consistently, all the time. So, thank you.
I'm taking hope. I'm taking hope because I look at these people in the room and you're all showing up and you're here with curiosity and willing to learn. I'm taking hope because I see my friends here in the first row who put this event together and fought for what they believe in. And I'm taking hope because if we don't have hope, if we don't give meaning to event, then we're not going to be able to move forward. This is post-traumatic growth. It's being able to give meaning when something bad is happening. Dr. Edith Eger, who is a Holocaust survivor and a trauma psychologist, said, we can't choose to vanish the dark, but we can choose to kindle the light. And as educators, my call for action for you is to kindle the light, is to start seeing people, your student, as people and not as problems, is to reach out for them. When you see that kid sitting there and not talking to anyone, be curious, ask them why, try to see the primary emotion and not the secondary emotion, reach out to the parent, ask the questions. I see hope.
I want to thank each and every one of our panelists tonight, David, Dr. Shone, Dr. Jaramillo, Mubin, and Miri, for your incredible insights and open and honest sharing. I want to thank the Museum of Tolerance, especially Lorraine, Sais, and Dylan up in the booth, who helped us get comfortable in the room tonight, making sure everything was working, and the LACOE Jewish American Heritage Group, the Equity and Social Justice Team, and 360 Perspectives. This was really a gargantuan group effort, and I'm so proud to be here and to be part of this tonight. And most importantly, thank you to everyone who attended this evening. I haven't looked this way because I've been focused on them, but we are so grateful for all of your partnership in making the world a better place for all of us. And I wish you all a lovely evening and almost the weekend. Thank you so much for being here.